The Sand Creek Massacre, which took place on November 29, 1864, stands out as one of the most notorious incidents of the Indian Wars. Initially portrayed in the media as a triumph over a courageous defense by the Cheyenne, subsequent first-hand accounts contradicted these narratives, prompting military and dual congressional inquiries into the unfolding events. With the onset of the gold and silver rush in the Rocky Mountains during the 1850s, a surge of white settlers streamed into the mountains and surrounding foothills. This influx displaced and infuriated the Cheyenne and Arapaho inhabitants, and the Pikes Peak Gold Rush of 1858 heightened the tension to a critical level. The Indians began launching attacks on wagon trains, mining camps, and stagecoach lines, a trend that escalated during the Civil War when the presence of soldiers in the area significantly diminished. This escalation marked the beginning of the Colorado War of 1863-1865. Amid the escalating conflict between Native Americans and miners, Territorial Governor John Evans dispatched Colonel John Chivington, a voluntary militia commander, to pacify the Indians. Despite his past as a clergy member, Chivington harbored no sympathy for the Indians, and his intentions to eliminate them were widely acknowledged. Evans also issued two directives. The first mandated that friendly Indians assemble at designated camps with a threat of violence against those who refused. The second urged citizens to kill and destroy Native Americans categorized as hostile by the state. During the spring of 1864, as the Civil War unfolded in the eastern part of the country, Chivington initiated a brutal campaign against the Cheyenne and their allies. His troops targeted all Indian communities, destroying villages in the process. In response, the Cheyenne, along with neighboring Arapaho, Sioux, Comanche, and Kiowa in Colorado and Kansas, adopted a defensive stance and engaged in warfare. Soon, Evans and Chivington bolstered their militia by forming the 3rd Colorado Cavalry, a unit of short-term volunteers who became known as the 100 Daysers. Following a summer marked by scattered small raids and skirmishes, the Cheyenne and Arapaho expressed a readiness for peace. Consequently, Indian representatives convened with Evans and Chivington at Camp Weld outside of Denver on September 28, 1864. While no treaties were formally signed, the Indians believed that by reporting and camping near army posts, they were declaring peace and seeking sanctuary. However, on the day of the peace talks, Chivington received a telegram from General Samuel Curtis, his superior officer, conveying the message, "I want no peace till the Indians suffer more. No peace must be made without my directions." Unaware of Curtis's telegram, Black Kettle and approximately 550 Cheyenne and Arapaho, having made their peace, traveled south to establish a camp on Sand Creek under the promised protection of Fort Lyon. Those who remained opposed to the agreement headed north to join the Sioux. Aware that the Indians had surrendered, Chivington led his 700 troops, many of whom were heavily intoxicated, to Sand Creek and strategically positioned them, along with their 4 howitzers, around the Indian village. Black Kettle, ever trusting, raised both an American and a white flag of peace over his teepee. However, Chivington disregarded the symbols of peace and surrender, signaling for the attack. With an easy victory in sight, cannons and rifles unleashed a barrage upon the camp as the Indians scattered in panic. The frenzied soldiers charged, mercilessly shooting down men, women, and children. A few warriors managed to resist, enabling some camp members to escape across the stream. One man, Silas Soule, a Massachusetts abolitionist, defied Colonel Chivington's orders. He refused to allow his cavalry company to fire into the crowd. The troops continued their indiscriminate assault throughout most of the day, committing numerous atrocities. One lieutenant was reported to have killed and scalped 3 women and 5 children who had surrendered and pleaded for mercy. Eventually, ceasing their attack, they returned to the camp, killing all the wounded they could find before mutilating and scalping the dead, including pregnant women, children, and babies. Before departing, they looted the teepees and divided up the Indians' horse herd. After the onslaught, up to 150 natives lay dead, predominantly old men, women, and children. Conversely, the cavalry suffered only 9 or 10 casualties, with about 3 dozen wounded. Black Kettle and his wife followed the others up the streambed, his wife being shot several times, but miraculously managing to survive. The survivors, over half of whom were wounded, sought refuge in the camp of the Cheyenne Dog Warriors, who had remained opposed to the peace treaty, at the Smoky Hill River. Many Indians joined the Dog Soldiers, believing that successful negotiations with the white men were impossible and choosing to wage war against them. The Sand Creek Massacre is often cited as a crucial factor leading to the Battle of Little Bighorn, as numerous Cheyenne warriors dedicated their lives to war against the U.S. The Colorado Volunteers returned to Denver and were hailed as heroes, proudly displaying the scalps they had taken. Initially, the press portrayed the battle as a triumph over a valiant defense by the Cheyenne. However, conflicting testimony from eyewitnesses emerged within weeks, prompting a military investigation and 2 congressional inquiries into the events. Silas Sewell was eager to testify against Chivington, but after giving his testimony, he was murdered by Charles W. Squires, a killing believed to have been ordered by Chivington. As the details of the massacre surfaced, the U.S. public was horrified by its brutality. The congressional investigation concluded that the crime was a sedulously and carefully planned massacre. When questioned during the military inquiry about why children had been killed, one of the soldiers quoted Chivington as saying, "Nits make lice." Although Chivington was condemned in the investigation and compelled to resign, neither he nor anyone else faced justice for the massacre. While the Sand Creek Massacre stirred outrage among Easterners, it found favor among many in Colorado Territory. Chivington later took the stage in Denver, captivating audiences with his war tales and proudly displaying 100 Indian scalps, including those of women. As news of the massacre reached the Indians on the southern and northern plains, their determination to resist white encroachment hardened. A vengeful fervor swept the land, and peace was only restored after a quarter of a century. Over the years, the site of the Sand Creek Massacre has been visited and commemorated. An elderly John Chivington returned to the area in 1887, and in 1908, veterans of the Colorado regiments planned a reunion at the site. In August of 1950, the Colorado Historical Society, with the assistance of residents in the Eads and Lamar Chambers of Commerce, placed a marker atop the bluff at the Dawson South Bend. Descendants of Sand Creek victims remain active in tribal communities in Montana, Oklahoma, and Wyoming, working alongside council representatives and the National Park Service. Nevertheless, the incident has remained a source of controversy, particularly in Colorado, where it has traditionally been hailed as a foundational victory for the state. The designation of the Sand Creek Massacre as a National Historic Site took place on August 2, 2005, nearly a decade after Congress mandated this action in 1998. The process faced delays and challenges over the years, marked by controversy and disagreement. However, it was ultimately organized to provide an accurate commemoration of that tragic event in American history,